have an exciting topic today. This is global health and the private sector, relationship counseling for friends with benefits. Here in this conference where we're talking about tenacity and we're talking about global development, I thought one area understudied and often neglected is the private sector and how we should engage. So here we go. Are you guys ready? Global health just loves the private sector. See, public-private partnerships, they're everywhere. What can't they do? Medicines, innovation, full access, everyone gets whatever they want. How much R&D spending is by the private sector? Pharma accounts for 3 of the top 10 private sector companies investing, and 8 of the top 25. There's big money out there, and our hopes in global health are that all of it will come to benefit us, each of us and everyone. But I'm here to tell you, this is not healthy. This is the sad puppy dog love. This is the kind of middle school crush where you do things you shouldn't, okay? Think about it. Think about it. Do not be this. Oops, sorry, we missed one. Relationships like this don't work. Now, this is what we're after. If you ever wondered what universal health coverage means, it means this. Everyone, at any time, gets exactly what they want at an affordable cost, easily delivered, and with some kind of ecstatic delivery. Actually, in global health, we want this. So we want that for everyone everywhere. Let me give you some relationship history. Talk about global health and the private sector and how this all began. In the beginning, there were only states. There was no private sector per se. But at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the private sector began to show its innovation, its strength, and its majesty. This is the beginning of it. But this is what actually happened. The private sector delivered child labor. This is a picture from a North Carolina mill, close to home right here. Here is water quality. This is what the private sector did to water quality. This is what the private sector did for disease. Has everyone seen this map before? Ooh, lots of no's. Excellent. I will tell you exactly what this is. Sometimes this is called the ghost map, and this is one of the first epidemiological maps ever drawn. What it's showing you in each of these black bars, each one of those, there's 2 there, there's 1, there's 1, there's 1, there's a lot right there, tons right there. Each of those is a case of cholera. And the ghost map was made by John Snow in 1854. So he wandered around, kept track of who had gotten sick, and tried to find patterns. He tried to find the patterns, and the patterns were clustered around this pump. Guess who operated that pump? Yes, the private sector. Yes, the East London Waterworks Company. This was a private sector company. There were 6 or 7 operating in London at the time, and there was no such thing at that time as urban services. These were provided by private companies. Probably many of you have heard of fire departments that used to be by subscription. The assumption of services by the state begins in the Industrial Revolution. So, we're going to talk about relationship management, the ill health, the environmental destruction, and the societal disruption of the Industrial Revolution led to responses. This is the dawn of modern public health. Actually, it goes back a lot further, so I'm saying modern public health. Modern public health starts in the sort of 1840s and 50s with statistics and then innovations like this one. So here's what happened. The office of the mayor, that's a political innovation. That title goes back to Latin times, to Roman times, but the office of the mayor, as you know it, is an answer to cholera. It's the empowerment of some urban authority. The formation of all city councils is because of cholera. It's designed to deal with this problem of urban filth, water supply, sanitation, and sewerage. So you establish, this is a political innovation, you establish a ratepayer with local elections. This is the front line of democracy. So if you're wondering, how do you get societies to work? What's the core of development? The core of development is urban services. Probably most of you in your own personal experiences contact the government most frequently over urban services. You know, people get elected, they lie, they cheat on their wives, they molest other people, and people don't really write letters. But if trash doesn't get collected, well, then you're going to call City Hall. Well, you know, I can't complain about everything. So today I'm just going to say that urban services and public health are at the core of the foundation of democracy, and they're designed to constrain the private sector. The first innovations looked like this. This one I'm showing you, this is the inside of Public Waterworks #1. The first one ever built, a monument to society. And this is not limited to London. This is actually pretty fancy, and it has that nice Victorian feel. Not all of them did that, but check out Chicago's. Any of the old waterworks, they look like this. It's not just big cities either. You know, here's one in Florence, Nebraska. Around the turn of the 20th century, roughly from, say, 1880 to 1920, these were monuments to modernity. This is the highest and best expression of society. And at that time, it's an a resurgence of the government, trying to take control of the private sector, constrain it to things that it's good at, and meet basic needs. We would think of this kind of democratization, both the participation of citizens and the provision of basic services. This is the foundation of an equal society. It's the protection from diseases and risks and the affirmation of other rights. So universal primary education has its roots in this time as well. Most of what we aspire to do in global health has a heritage in this kind of thinking, that you provide universal guaranteed benefits to everyone. Universal health coverage is a slightly different version of this, but in the way we talk about it, we usually don't refer back to this kind of heritage. This is where public health comes from. These are a sample of progressive era reforms, fairly typical of the time. Things like food and drug regulation. The founding legislation, the Pure Food and Drug Act for our FDA is 1906. Universal access to the electoral offices, the women's suffragist movement. There's all kinds of progressive era reforms, including progressive taxation. These are not old. Progressive taxation is invented around 1915 by a guy at Columbia who was at the School of Public Health as well, I might add. Okay? These are all things. These are the ways that progressive era reformers were trying to deal with the aftermath of industrialization. In global health, this is not really what happens for us. We instead are distracted by the potential, the endlessly innovative, creative potential of the private sector. Looks like this. So when we think about how can the private sector help us, we think about, ooh, phones, drugs. Who doesn't like phones and drugs? And then you get cars that goes fast, and then there's like social media, you can waste all your time on it. It's kind of fun too. And then there's like consumer choice. For those of you who are not from the States or have lived elsewhere, it's really an education to go to a grocery store. You think you want milk, right? You're okay in the milk aisle, and then you got like almond milk and rice milk, and there's goat milk and sheep milk and cow milk, 2%, 1%, 5% full fat. What are you going to do? Wow, that's the private sector in action. It is really impressive, and it should be doing those things in areas that we decide are important for innovation, okay? However, what we've been doing in global health is to engage the private sector in other ways, such as this way. Here is the recently departed Jim Kim. Jim Kim reformed the World Bank to look more like McKinsey, a private sector consulting firm, and then when he resigned abruptly, he did so to go to private equity. I'm just asking the question, is this the kind of leadership we need in institutions that are charged with the well-being of 2/3 of the world's population? Here's a second example. The main qualification for Peter Sands to run the Global Fund was about a decade at a large English bank. This bank has been fined multi-million-dollar fines. Just a couple of days ago, an additional $1.1 billion fine for money laundering imposed by the state of New York for not fixing things they were fined $300 million over in 2014 when he was on the job. I'm just asking some questions here. Is this how we want to select our leadership for important global health institutions? I think we need to think about this a little bit more. And one of the first things he did when he entered office at the Global Fund was to suggest partnerships with an alcohol company. it just raises questions. I'm not saying that the private sector isn't good at supply chain and logistics, because of course they're fantastic about it. But maybe we should think about it a little bit. Here's a third example. The primary qualification for Mr. Gates and his foundation is success as a software executive. Why is it that perhaps the world's most influential private citizen should have qualifications in that area? This is the only private citizen ever to address the United Nations, for instance, and is the source of a great many of the strategies with which we must contend. We should think about this. The kind of affection global health has for the private sector leads to heartache. One way to talk about this is this way. On the one hand, you have people thinking about collective good, collective action, and shared benefits, and they're trying to achieve it through mechanisms that are based on self-interest. Definitely you want self-interest, and self-interest is an excellent allocation mechanism. So I'm only offering a perspective here that you may not have heard before. I'm not an anti-private sector guy. I'm thinking that these two things need to be kept in the right balance. So in closing, I'm going to offer you some relationship counseling for these friends with benefits. The first one, you need some personal protective equipment. If you like a strong public sector, you should say so. When you're thinking about programs to embrace, advocate for redistribution and a strengthening of government systems that would do that, including taxation. Taxation is the ultimate public-private partnership. Number two, prepare for resistance. The private sector will not always like this. They will complain about what you're doing. You will need to fight for regulation that will improve the private sector. Oh, sorry about that. Part number three is try to constrain the private sector, limit their interest, limit their activities to areas where innovation and self-interest will produce societal value. And then in the last one, when you really have to get into things, protect yourselves. Thank you very much.